Hi, Zach. Thank you for
Hi.
taking the time to join me here today. We're really excited to have you on this latest Under the Oak edition, and you're in Brooklyn, right?
Yeah, I'm in Bushwick.
Oh, okay, awesome. We're both in Brooklyn. We're both existing in kind of a rainy day, but it's a little bit cozy. Hopefully,
Yeah,
how are you feeling today?
I'm good. I'm actually I'm chilling with my cats. So here's the other one. So it's a rainy day, but I'm at home doing some work, just resting.
Oh, so nice to be with cats. I feel like there's something especially cozy about cats and just being around them and having them all cuddled up. So I love that. Um, I kind of want to start today's conversation just just reviewing a little bit of what you've written for Tuscan Quill, which is your piece on I want to make sure I'm saying I can say POTS, right? Or do you
Hmm.
or
Yeah.
POTS? Is there one or
No,
the other? It's both. Is fine.
it's
Okay.
pots. Yeah.
Okay, so your piece on pods, and I was just reviewing it in preparation of this interview, and I think the feeling that you really left me with from that piece the first time I read it was just especially the sense of like uplifting and the inspiration of like encouraging empathy, and I like really loved that message, and that's kind of the feeling I was left with the first time I read it, and then just reviewing it. Um, it is a lot about this invisible disability and your experience of living with this condition. Um, what else would you say? Is there anything else you would tack on of what the article was about to you when you wrote it?
Yeah. I mean, I think it was definitely about empathy. That was a big part of it. But I think it was also just about teaching people maybe that, at any given point, someone may be suffering or may be having a hard time. And, if you don't give them the opportunity to feel like they can share that with you, you may never know and they may never improve. So, if you care about someone, if you love someone, it's in your best interest to check in with them, see how they're doing.
Yeah, totally. And I think a part of this, um, a part of pods that is so interesting that you really get into, and that this detail that I was reminded of when I was reviewing your piece was about you said you recently at the time of writing it had gone on a trip, excuse me, in in a wheelchair, and you talk a lot about the differences between somebody experiencing a condition where they're physically and visibly affected by it versus this type of experience, which I was kind of just curious. I guess you kind of get into this a little bit in the piece, but like how much of the mental load do you feel like comes from knowing that it's invisible and that you feel like, I don't know, how does that change how you interact with people? And what would you think would be the difference between that and like being in a wheelchair?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the biggest things that I experienced was, I wasn't sitting down 100% of the time. A lot of times I would get up from the wheelchair. There's actually a joke my friend made is every time I'd stand up, he'd be like, "Oh my God, we performed a miracle. That's incredible." Um, but as much as I am fortunate to not, be wheelchair bound 100% of the time, there's still this fear that when people see me stand up, that, they're going to be confused or upset or uncomfortable at the idea of like someone maybe co-opting, disabilities, not culture per se, but what people who are quote unquote truly disabled need, or that I come off as lazy, and just don't want to walk around. And a lot of it is definitely internal. I didn't really experience anything like that from people, partially because it was in Japan and they didn't speak the same language as me. But um, I think it uh, it's sort of this general stress that even, exists outside of the wheelchair, that, people will think that I'm making this up because there's no way to tell. Looking at me, I'm just your average human being that
Yeah.
walks and, doesn't really show any evidence of something being wrong. So yeah, it's sort of just this internal fear that there's judgment.
It's almost I hate to put like this sort of label on it, but it's reminding me a lot. People talk about like imposter syndrome, and I don't know if it's. Do you feel like you would like identify with that sort of label or not really?
Yeah, 100%. It's like I don't really deserve to call myself disabled because this, because I can walk, or I'm only like needing to sit for 80% of the day. I'm not sitting 100%. There's always something within me that is like, because I have the power to do these things, that means I don't really feel like I belong in this community, or feel like I have the right to that term. So
Hmm.
yeah, I mean that's a perfect way to describe it.
I would love to like just take a step back, and I know you kind of get into this in the article, but I also want to like make sure we have all of the latest and everything. But what is like, how does it? I know in the article you kind of describe going through life. You're forced to go through life at a little bit of like a slower pace. And like at this time in your life, what does that pace look like? How are you moving through your days like with this, consideration in mind?
Yeah, so it's very interesting. Around the time that I wrote that article, and like the article was released, mm, I don't want to say magically because that would it's not exactly the truth, but things vastly improved for me, just almost in an instant. Um, and at this point, I'm more or less able to exist within the world as if I didn't have this problem. There are still limitations. I still do need to be seated for most of the day. I have to consume like 3 to 10 times the amount of salt as the average person to feel normal. And I can't like run. I can't do any standing exercise for more than a short period of time.
Mm-hmm.
So any, job that would be involved with physical labor, lifting things or standing on my feet all day, I still can't do that. But beyond that, I'm pretty much back to normal. So yeah, and it's been really nice I just got a job. I started in like 2 weeks. So, and I've been doing a lot more activities. It's really been like this drastic life-changing experience.
That's so amazing. I'm so happy to hear that. Like that all sounds so positive and like moving in a direction that you probably couldn't have maybe even imagined like in the midst of all of this. How has your mindset shifted? I think sometimes for me whenever life starts to get good after I've experienced something really hard, I sometimes almost feel like maybe this is all gonna go away. I don't know, but how are you feeling about it all? That's so pessimistic to say. I know it's not all
It's
gonna go away, and I'm so excited, but
Yeah,
I just struggle with that myself sometimes.
I totally get it. I mean, for one, my thought process is at worst it'll just go back to what it was before, and I've lived with that for like almost 2 years, so I'm pretty used to that. One of the things I'd mentioned in the article is that heat is a really big issue for me. And, when the article came out, it was winter time. And so there is this fear within me that now that it's warming up and getting more humid, if I spend more time outside, I may, start feeling bad and returning to that state.
Hmm.
Um, or, I've been sort of, I have this tendency to like when I have these restrictions on my life, when they're suddenly let up, I
Hmm.
just do things to such an extreme that I end up hurting myself. Like I was actually a vegetarian for 15 years, and the second I stopped doing it, I ate just so much junk food that I couldn't eat before, and I was in like constant stomach pain because of it. But I mean, it was so worth it. It was just like after that long of not being able to experience that, it was nice to get that. So yeah, I've just been like taking every opportunity to do things that I can now that I feel like I can go outside or just like be around friends or even like exert energy. Um, and I'm worried that, there will be burnout. But again, at the end of the day, I'm cherishing the this time and this ability to just be even close to where I was before all of this happened. So yes, I mean, there is a part of me that's like, if it all goes back, I'll lose all of these cool new things in my life. But I'm trying to remain positive and just, hoping that this is a permanent change.
I love that. And I actually love your perspective around the like vegetarian switch. I think there's almost like a loss in, I don't know, maybe it's this is just my perspective, but sometimes I feel like I've lost the value of indulgence and like having like being like for 15 years I didn't do this and I'm probably gonna it's gonna be a little crazy, but I'm gonna go all in on it. It's like such a fun energy. What do you feel like you are like I guess that you say you're like doing a lot of activities. What do you feel like you're most like enjoying now that maybe you couldn't have done before that you're really like immersing yourself in?
The greatest thing has been exercise. In the past, I could I remember there was this day I was in therapy and talking to my therapist, and I was like, yeah, I swam for about 25 minutes, and then I went to the pharmacy, and that's it. That's all I could do in the day. And I was like, and that's pretty normal for me. And he was like that's insane. That's like a morning routine for someone, and then they just have the rest of the day ahead of them. But for me, that was like all I could muster, and then I just have to spend the rest of the day in bed. And swimming was like it was part of the physical therapy of overcoming the symptoms of POTS. So it was something that I sort of had no choice but to do for my well-being. But it was really, really strenuous and overwhelming. But now I've been obsessed with exercise. I've been like learning all about it and the different ways you can exercise and weight training versus cardio and like how to do things properly. And I consume a lot of media around like the efficacy of different supplements that you could take or which exercises are better than others for the same muscle group. Just all these
Mm.
specific things that I probably don't need to know to exercise properly, but it's so interesting and so cool. And I love going to the gym. I hated going to the gym growing up, but now it's like that I can do it after having not been able to do it for so long. It's so much fun.
That's so amazing. Like this literally makes me so happy to hear this arc. And honestly, exercise is something that can be so overwhelming. Like even as like I've been lucky enough to not have any like major problems, like a few things here and there if I've like overworked a muscle, but I cannot for the life of me wrap my head around like the specifics of like weightlifting versus cardio and like how much I should do of each. And it's like one of these areas of your life that usually feels like a little bit like tangential, you know what I mean? You're not like, okay, work, friends, like whatever, people organize their lives differently, but for me that usually feels like, okay, I'm gonna do it if I can. So having like diving in and like fully investing yourself in it is something I feel like so many people like dream of, and I love that you've like taken this opportunity to do that and like really understand how your body's working. And I mean it must have, do you feel like this in part came from like the fact that you just had to be so hyper aware of your condition like when you were dealing with these medical concerns? I feel like you become more focused on your body in that experience. And do you think that's kind of like it's all a progression of that?
Yeah, I mean, so much like what caused this in the first place, what caused it to get better. It's really hard to tell.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think in large part it was seeing, dietarily how certain foods would affect my body or what certain activities affected it or, how to structure my day. And, because like when I first had this, I just sort of went about my life as if nothing was wrong, and then I would be tired all the time. But now, after a year or two of knowing, okay, I need to be sitting for this amount of time, this is about how much exercise I can do, scheduling like what time of day the exercise happens. If I do it in the morning, I'm just ruined for the rest of the day versus doing it at night. Um, and the consuming the salt thing, just consuming a lot more salt. I do think all of these things reflected in an overall improvement of health. Now, there were studies that showed that for people who were having these issues, there was just this sudden improvement after like a year or so, and no one really knows why. So it's also possible that that was just the thing that caused it, after however, it was like a year and a half of it, it just suddenly got better. So it's hard for me to tell exactly which one of the two it could be, but I definitely think improving my physical health and understanding my body better was in some way part of the improvement.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you if you had any like specific theories, but I feel like I always just come to the conclusion that it's like a mix of like so many different variables going into whatever is happening in your body that especially if there's not like a lot of concrete research and, understanding behind it, then you just I guess don't have an answer and you kind of have to just keep doing what works, like, right?
Yeah.
Um I um I was also kind of curious about your like if you had connected with have you connected with other people that have had similar experiences? Did you end up connecting I don't know, I guess when you were thinking about writing your article, did you talk to any other people that were kind of going through the same experiences and how are they doing if you have?
Yeah, I didn't connect with anyone individually. There was one person I did, but that person was someone that had been diagnosed with this years and years ago, and at this point was basically able to function entirely. But there
Mm.
were support groups I joined, like there are Facebook pots, and uh, there's another term I think I include in my article, but it's called dysautonomia, which is just like a more umbrella term where POTS is a type of dysautonomia.
Mm.
Those support groups have been very helpful, of just asking questions or reading about other people's experiences and seeing how they've dealt with the pain and how they got through it. And I think it's just sort of been nice to understand that I'm not alone in this process, even if, it's not communicating with people directly. Um, just like even reading about these things has been a great way to improve my overall morale and know, again, going back to like that concept of imposter syndrome, like know that it's not just all in my head and that this is this real problem that people feel and it affects their lives.
Yeah, and the only way to I feel like a lot of the times imposter syndrome like puts so much pressure on the person that is usually they are experiencing some sort of I don't know if discrimination is the right word, but like the reason they feel like it's not valid because of some a societal understanding like, oh, if you look normal, like we're just gonna assume that everything's fine with you health wise, and that is something real that happens. So it's not like out of the realm of possibility to be like, oh, why do I feel like this isn't valid? It's like because other people aren't, open minded and considerate enough to realize like that things aren't always, what meets the surface. I was thinking, like, whenever you were kind of talking about the experiences of other people and just reading about them and hearing about them, I think that's also so helpful whenever you are trying to broach any sort of challenge in the medical world. Like, um, I've seen some close friends that are, my age now that we're like getting to a certain age. I feel like you've seen throughout your 20s, like people undergoing serious medical challenges, and I feel like every time I watch somebody go through this, not only is the actual condition itself just such a stressor and a pressure point, but trying to advance your challenges through the medical industry, every part of it just seems like such a challenge, from prescriptions to doctors to insurances. It's like, can you speak to that, and what was your experience like in that realm?
Yeah, I mean, it's I think, mentioning that concept of like physical versus visible versus invisible disability, like there is such this sense amongst people with invisible disabilities. I see it again and again and again, especially which I mentioned in the article, women experience this to a greater extent, this sense of not being taken seriously. That you go into a doctor's office and basically it's one of two options, which is either they're going to have no idea what's wrong with you and they're just going to give you some nonsense answer or, not help at all. For example, I went to a doctor to help with like the fatigue aspects. And at first he was like, we're going to solve this problem. We got it. And then after like a sleep study, he was like, "Have you ever tried coffee?" And it was just this huge smack in the face because I'd gotten my hopes up so high that like I'd finally be able to figure out this problem. And he was just like, you know, the least helpful person.
Was that a
Um,
joke or like?
no, he was being serious.
Oh my gosh. And you would
Yeah,
think that at that point you had undergone a sleep study that seems like a lot of effort, like, and then it's just like, are they just gonna charge you $1 million? Like,
exactly. Yeah, and it's so frustrating because like my belief system in like the field of medicine has just dwindled to such a great or such a small it has dwindled incredibly because
yeah.
with each time I go, I feel like they're one less willing to help and two less able to help. Yeah, and it's frustrating and it's demoralizing and it makes you, again, it really fits into that like imposter syndrome because you go and they're like, there's nothing wrong with you, clearly, or you're making it up. They don't say that exactly, but it's sort of what they imply. And it's stressful and it makes you feel so much worse. And I think part of the problem is that there's some things that are just new and they haven't really figured out what causes it, POTS being one of those examples. And as a result, there's kind of no point in a lot of ways. I definitely think, if you have these issues and you don't know what you have, it could be beneficial to go. But once you know what it is, at a certain point, it's just like every time I've gone to the doctor within the last like 6 months, they've just been like, okay, I guess, just keep chugging and maybe it'll get better. Or they've thrown some random medication at me that did nothing. And like, it's very frustrating. And then you get into, like you said, the money aspect and insurance. And it's just, you know, I don't know if you've ever done a thing where you've had to file for a peer-to-peer, but like
Mm.
just having to wait for them to say like, okay, we will justify this and we're going to wait until we can get insurance to agree to it to have the procedure done. And you're just spending all this time waiting and then nothing ends up getting done, or it does get done. And then again, you're like reminded of how much the process sucks. Like it's just all made to beat you down.
It's 100%, and it's an exhausting process on top of already having this like core challenge. And I think the crazy part is I think people's solution, what I hear like everybody saying is like you have to be especially when I feel like other women tell me this all the time, like you have to be your own advocate, like you have to do your own research, you have to advocate for yourself, you have to kind of suggest things to them. And I actually was reading something the other day and I sent it to one of my friends who's, currently undergoing a lot of medical challenges. I sent this to her because it said one of the best pieces of advice I ever got about dealing with the medical system in America is that if a doctor denies something that you have asked for, or you're looking for a diagnosis or something like that, and they're like just seeming like they're not doing their job, this person recommended that you tell them to make sure that they put in your chart that they have, either denied you a medication or given you a specific diagnosis or said there's nothing else that we can do. You have to tell them to put that in your chart, and that might prod them to kind of have an alternate outcome or maybe invest a little bit more. And it's just like, that's the world we're living in, and it's helpful to know all the tricks and whatever. But the fact that you have to manipulate the system with something related to your health in a space that's supposed to be, people that are supposed to be dedicated to improving well being. And I don't know how it got to where it is, but it doesn't feel like it's that.
Yeah, it really doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's something you have to experience to really understand, because I think when you don't experience it, when you're someone who goes to the doctor and they're like, this is what's wrong with you, here's how we fix it, like you really just don't grasp how that could be something conceivable. But once you feel it for yourself, you're like, oh, this is terrible. And I'm sorry that anyone has to ever deal with this.
it's like this sense of this is supposed to be my resort. Like this is
Yeah.
supposed to be it. And it's just yeah, no, I just it's a crazy, crazy thing. Do you follow closely like any sorts of as you've, had to be in this space for an amount of time, do you follow anything like on a bigger scale of any changes that we should be paying attention to that maybe help advocate for like these sorts of issues or are you aware of anything like that?
Yes, uh, in a way. I think unfortunately it's the the current administration is doing a great job of making it even harder for people to accomplish these sort of goals. Like they're slashing Medicare and Medicaid, Social Security, that in a lot of cases people are having limited access to healthcare. And there's this system in place. I don't know if you know about this, but there's like a limit on how many doctors there are to some extent. There's this thing called, I think it's called the residency cap, where, and it's
Mm.
set by Congress, where they limit the amount of people that could be in residency at any specific time, meaning that the amount of people that become doctors is limited. Uh, and Unless they fix that, wait times are going to be forever. And the amount of care that you can get is going to be very limited, and it's also going to be very expensive. So yeah, in a lot of ways, the system is built and is being built in a way that makes it significantly harder for anyone to get the care they need. And
Hmm.
there's also disability, and how, there's this crazy rule that at any given point, someone who is disabled and on disability can't have more than $3,000 in their savings, or in assets, I believe, as well, meaning that you can't save money. So if you're disabled, how will you have a retirement plan? How will you be able to have money if something goes wrong further than it already is? So, the overall, the system is broken, and it's not helpful at all for people who are struggling.
I'm like, I'm like so appreciative of you enlightening me of all of this because this is so crazy. Like why would that make sense that you can't be disabled if you have more than a certain amount of in savings? Because if you have enough money, then you're not facing challenges. Like what?
I think I would have to read into where it started, but chances are it comes from this sense that people who are on disability are freeloaders. And so by allowing them to have a lot of assets, it's like, oh, why do you need to be on disability if you have money? And so it's sort of a way to keep in
Uh,
check, these people, like, from uh, getting government benefits while also having enough money. But $3,000 is nothing. Like, I think, I could sort of understand if it's like you're a millionaire and you're reaping disability, and like,
no, of course, of
and
course.
even then, like, that amount of money, depending on where you live, can only last you so long. And if you physically can't work, like that still might not be enough. But again, like, yes, if you're Jeff Bezos, you shouldn't be on disability. I'm sure you're fine. But like, the vast
Agreed.
majority of people might need, almost certainly need more than $3,000 a month, I think it is. And so it's,
Yeah.
or it's not, sorry, it's literally at any point you can't go over $3,000. So,
Right.
like, the second that threshold is met, you will get audited. Um, so
But you can
it,
still be considered disabled even if you're not on
yeah,
disability,
yeah,
right?
yeah. This is specifically for people on disability.
Right, right, right. It's just, and it's all just like, not to put like my tin hat on, but like, it literally is like hospitals are just businesses. Like,
Oh,
and
100%.
businesses just make decisions that are best for them. And when you think about it, like, again, this is a very broad-based conspiracy theory, or not even a conspiracy theory, just like when you look at it, like, as you've explained with the residency cap, it's like, doctors benefit by having fewer, of them available in the market. Like it's simple supply demand. If we flood the market with more doctors, then which I honestly is this already happening? I don't know why. I had a bunch of friends that went into medical school, but I haven't thought about this recently. But there as the supply of doctors increases, obviously doctors get paid less. And so as part of that conversation, there's just so many fascinating things about the medical field. But part of that conversation is that, um, like, they don't want to, the people that are going to go for jobs as doctors are, if you want them to be the smartest people, you have to pay them the most. Because, like, of course, in our society, the people that, like, there's no one that wants to just genuinely be a doctor for the goodness of, out of the goodness of their heart. I'm sure there are
Yeah.
tons of people like
Yeah.
that, and they exist, and I'm sure there's, like, I've actually met and a lot of amazing doctors and different, one-off experiences, but as a whole, it's like this isn't a profession that's, like, definitely secure and well-paying. You basically decide it from the time you're, like, a young person in high school that this is your path that you're going to be on because it, is admirable and whatever. It's like doctor, lawyer, those are the ones. And then,
Yeah.
like, if you have, this overabundance of them and it's not paying as well, it may not attract people that are as smart. And then there's the whole thing of, like, different specialties pay a lot more. So the kids who are scoring the highest and doing the best in all of their programs choose the specialties that pay the most and have, like, the easiest work-life balance. Like dermatology is,
I was
like,
gonna say, yeah, dermatology.
and it's just like, I don't know, it's just craziness, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, it's just, there's so many things at play there. Then, and a lot of them don't feel like they're at the core. The priority is, you know, really human, like, American human health and longevity.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Um,
There's actually this thing called the diamond water paradox, which is sort of related to what you're describing, which is basically that despite the fact that water is integral for life and possibly one of the most important resources, it's worth significantly less than diamonds, which basically do absolutely nothing. Um, and it's this interesting question of, like, why do we value some things over others monetarily, even when maybe they're less useful or produce less. And I think it's a similar question in medicine. It's like, things like dermatology or plastic surgery. Um, those are the jobs that, and I mean, not to say that they're not important. They're extremely important. Dermatology, there's like, people get skin
yeah, yeah,
cancer and
of
people
course.
get all of these problems, maybe like burns all over their skin. They do a lot of important things, but it isn't to say that, like, a GI doctor does less work and therefore deserves to be paid less. Like, what they do is probably just as important. And there's not any, I mean, I'm sure there's a reason why dermatology is paid more. I don't personally know, but, you
I
know,
think maybe 'cause less insurance covers it,
oh, okay.
maybe.
Yeah, I don't know. I
It
just,
might be
yeah,
that.
there's a lot wrong with the way this world is structured. Um, and the incentive structure is very nonsensical in a lot of ways. And I think in a lot of ways people, and I mean, I don't need to go into like my stances on economics and all of that, but like, it's just there's a lot of confusing parts of this world, and I don't really know how to reconcile with that, because it's not like I really can do anything about it. You just kind of have to live with it.
I know. And do you feel at all like living in, there's something to me that feels a little bit different about living in New York. Like, even though we are in America and we're, like, near all of these crazy things that are going on, I don't know why I think it's probably just the close concentration of people and seeing so many people from so many different backgrounds every day that are having so many different experiences. I feel like that, I don't know, what's your perspective on, do you think that changes how empathetic people are? I don't know where you've lived before, if you've had other experiences, but there's something about that that definitely feels different to me. I don't know if you have thoughts there.
Yeah, oh, 100%. I mean, I grew up in the suburbs. I went to school in like this pretty empty town. Um, and now I live in the city, and there's 100% difference. And I not to make this like a red versus blue kind of thing, but that it's so evident throughout the country that in areas that are urban, that have a greater amount of diversity, greater amount of socioeconomic status amongst people, that those people tend to be more blue, and in more rural areas or suburban areas where it's more sprawling, people are generally more financially in the same area. Like those tend to have people be less, and again, I'm sorry to make this political, but less empathetic and more likely to be like thinking about themselves over other people, which a lot of times coincides with being a Republican. Um,
Hmm.
and so it's 100% the case that being around more people gives you more of a sense of how the world is and the differences in how people's lives are, and more willing to understand different viewpoints.
Yeah, yeah. That's definitely I'm very interested in this like intersection between like structural and emotional. I feel like that's always really interesting to me, and I was kind of reflecting on that a little bit when you were talking about your experience with like the medical system too, and with POTS, and it was, and I don't know, bear with me, hopefully we can make
It's
this
okay.
connection, but I
Yeah.
was just thinking kind of about how like I feel like um you like as you're experiencing something like this, you there's like the logistical points you have to check off, and then there's like these emotional points you have to check off. And it's like on one hand, I don't know, it was it just makes me curious about your experience, because on one hand I feel like you are living at like this slower pace of life where you, as a necessity, that is like something that you need, the rest and the recuperation and giving yourself time and grace and patience, so you have more time to kind of consider those things. But then you also have this like I don't know, I feel like in periods of time where I've had like a lot of downtime to think about things, sometimes that's not always good for me. And I was just like wondering how you balance that like mental component of it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. There's obviously the mental portion of like coming to terms with the fact that you're disabled, or coming to terms with the fact that you can't function like other people. And, that even though it is an invisible disability, there is this sense that like people look at me differently and think about me differently and think of me almost as lesser. And I don't think this is something people actually think. I think it's just that part of being disabled, a huge experience of that is going through this period where you feel like you are less worthy, of appreciation, of value. Um, and I think so. A big emotional journey was sort of coming to terms with the fact that that's not actually the truth, and that for the most part, people are very understanding and very willing to work within what you need. Um, and I also think that having a lot of free time means a lot of time where you do things that don't really help your mental health at all. Maybe for example, for me, a big issue was I was on Twitter a lot of the time. And Twitter, if anyone who isn't on Twitter right now, is a terrible place to be for mental health. Like it is miserable. So much so that I got a flip phone because
Oh my God, yes, I want to talk about this.
yeah, I
I'm
was like,
obsessed with this phone. What the heck? Wait, can
thank
I see
you.
it
Yeah,
again?
it's a Barbie themed phone. It's pink. It
Stop,
has like
you're
a
literally the
chain.
coolest person ever. That's amazing.
Thank you. But yeah, it's just like I needed to like I was on Twitter basically like 24/7. Whenever I
Okay.
was not like doing work or with friends, I was on Twitter, and or I was playing games on my phone, and it was just terrible for my mental health because you know so much of my life was just surrounded distracting myself or doing things that brought me no joy, and it felt hard, but it's so hard to undo it. The phone is made to keep you in, and I I think that it has been, again, it's like it's going through this process of like dealing with these hardships, dealing with like new situations where it's so easy to fall into these headspaces of like, you know, I am unworthy or I'm not good or I'm, on my phone all the time and therefore like I'm depressed and, I'm not gaining any positive knowledge of the world. And so I think that like doing things in your life to remedy that or, unlearn these negative viewpoints is something that's been very meaningful and very helpful for me through the process.
Aw, that's so beautiful. I feel like you have so much wisdom to share, and it's clear you've been so like self-reflective throughout this whole journey. And I really appreciate you just being vulnerable and sharing these things because it's a lot to go through, but I feel like you're in a great place. I think, not to speak for
Yeah,
you, but it
no,
seems really
yeah,
awesome.
yeah.
If it's not putting you like on the spot too much, I loved how you ended your essay with like just kind of a little bit more of like an open letter, to, this is what this essay is accomplishing and like this is what I want to encourage and build more of in this world. And I feel like those are really nice messages to put out. Is there anything like, again, if it's too on the spot, that's okay. But is
No,
there
it's
anything
okay.
that's been on your mind recently that you're like, I just want to say this to the world and this is how I'm feeling? I don't know.
Yeah, I really think similar to the message that I had at the end, but just in general, I really think that people should take a second to just like sit and think about, how they act, the things they believe, and, how they affect others. Because I think that in this day and age, people are so isolated and people are so focused on, social media, which a lot of times is built to make people angry and radicalized and further isolated. And I think it's so important to just say, why do I feel these things? Are these feelings logical? And do I need to like change my viewpoint and to just like be cognizant of how they are and what they think and how they relate to the world? Because I think doing that is so helpful both for yourself and for those around you. So I would highly recommend doing that. And also, I think everyone should get a flip phone. It's great.
Yes, I can't believe that's what I was calling you on the other day. Like, I'm
Yeah.
happy. Um, but that's such a beautiful message. And yes, we all can do more reflection and be more aware of how we are interacting with the world. And I think that's such a special message to share. So thank you for joining me
Yeah.
today.
Thank you for having me.
Yay. Okay, I'm just gonna hit stop recording.